Hello everyone, my name is Shawn Hendriks, and what I'm going to take you through in this video is a look at doing a rigging for a moderately more complicated armature than most beginners want to tackle. The reason I'm doing this is it's come up on the Area 3S Max forums a couple times. Just recently I explained the process of rigging something like this to someone on the forums. And then I looked around and found that on most of the other communities there were people asking similar questions and no one was really answering the question. So one guy had actually posted his full model that he was doing for a Luxo Junior lamp, and that's what you're seeing here. And he posted up asking if anyone could show him how to rig it. So I figured I might as well take this opportunity. So I pulled down the version of his model that he had, and I'm going to take you through doing the basic rig for this so that you have a working armature. Now, this is in no way a finished professional rig, what I'm going to design here. If you're a professional rigger, you're probably going to add in some extra controls and things like that for animators. I'm going to show you the basic rig to get you the basic control structure. I'm going to do it without any scripting, just using Eyecatchings and constraints, and that's it. So, to get started, let's take a look at the lamp itself. Now, if you look at something like this, particularly someone who's never done rigging before and is just getting into it, will start to think this is going to be horribly complex. Your initial thought is, oh, this is going to be easy. Then you start to dig and realize, oh, there's all these pivot points and things that I have to deal with. And they all interact with each other and are driving each other. How do I do this? So the first key thing is to remember you don't have to make this lamp actually work the way it works in real life. It just has to look like it works the way it works in real life. And that's a very freeing thing if you're new to 3D, to when you realize it's all about what it looks like, not about necessarily what it is, particularly in the world of entertainment. So in this case, there's a couple key things you can learn just by looking at how an actual lamp works. First is these arms are always going to stay parallel to each other, and these arms are always going to stay parallel to each other. That means really you only have to rig up one set of arms. The other set of arms can just be constrained to follow. Also, you'll notice that the joints always maintain their same orientation in relation to each other, no matter how you bend the lamp. So that again gives you an idea of the type of control you can do. You can actually constrain them to each other to maintain an orientation. So what it all comes down to is really to drive this lamp, all you need is one Eyecatching that runs here, and then the rest of it's a lot of constraints and links. So before we get too far in, the first thing you want to do, and this is key to any rig that you build, is you have to set up your pivot points well. If you have pivot points that are badly aligned, in the wrong spots, things like that, the rig will fall apart every time you try and move it, and it'll be very frustrating. And I think it's one of the early things that frustrates a lot of people starting to play with rigging. So in this particular case, I've set up most of them already. I left a couple just so you get an idea. So for instance, you can see the pivot points for the arms are all set to the base where they're going to pivot from. The ones that I left out was, for instance, the joints. So this joint's pivot is currently sitting in the middle. This isn't useful. It really should sit at the point where the Eyecatching pivots. So if I go and Effect Pivot Only and just say Align, I can then align to that pin and just say X, Y, and Z and Apply. So now my pivot will be there. And on this one, I'll do the exact same thing and align it to that pin. And we'll say X, Y, and Z and Apply. So we've got that all set. Now at this point, nothing is linked to anything. And the first thing we have to do is link up the parts that are going to become our Eyecatching. And since the Eyecatching is going to be this object, and the pin, that's where I'll start. So I go and pick my link tool, and I'll start with the pin, link it to the arm. Take this arm and link it to this arm. I'm ignoring this pin because it's irrelevant because I already have a joint there. This I'm going to link to that pin. That pin I'm going to link to here. And you notice I'm going many objects below my Eyecatching. And the only reason I'm doing this is if you build an Eyecatching and then link the base object, the Eyecatching, to another object, you're going to link it to another object space, which can cause the whole thing to twist and distort. And just to avoid that whole process, I link everything down below it. So once I've done that, I can now go in and build my first Eyecatching. So Animation, IK Solver, IK Limb Solver, pick the pin. Now normally, I might not build my Eyecatching first. I'd go through and set up everything else and constrain everything just to make sure I'm not going to build an Eyecatching, set everything up, and then it's going to twist and distort and do all sorts of weird things. The reason I'm doing the Eyecatching first thing here is just so that I can start moving things. You can see how the things I do affect the overall rig. So once you've created your first IK chain, the first thing to check is to see if anything twists or does anything weird when you move it. That'll be an indication that one of your pivot points is off, in which case you'll want to delete the IK chain and move your pivot point and then rebuild it again. In this case, looks like we're fine. So now what we want to do is start linking other things together. So first thing I'm going to do is just get rid of some of these pins by linking them off to the joints. All they are is visual, really, in this case. These pins here I will link off to this, just like so. And then, of course, this object here I'm going to link to that same IK chain that I just created, so it'll just follow along with it. And then this piece I'm going to link to this arm so it follows that arm. So at this point now, if I go and just move my IK chain, you can start to see it's starting to come together, but there's a lot of oddities. So now let's take our joints, and this one here I need to link to this so it follows along. So I'll just link that on like so. And again, if I go and move, it's starting to come together, but there's still some definite weirdness. So now what we want to do is make these three pieces orient to each other. So I'm going to pick the first one, and I'm simply going to go into Animation, Constraints, Orientation Constraint, and constrain it to the base joint. Now, depending on how your pivots are set up, if they're not aligned when you do this, this one will suddenly flip out and kind of go to a weird orientation. If you do the Keep Initial Offset, then you'll be fine. If I go and pick on this object, I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to go to Constraints, Orientation Constrain, and I'll constrain to the one before. And again, you might need to use the Keep Initial Offset to make this work. Once you've got that done, now if I go and pick on here, we're starting to get there. We're almost there now. Now I just need to make these two arms follow those arms. So I'm really going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to go Animation, and we're going to go Constraints, Orientation Constrain to that one. And again, Keep Initial Offset is a good chance you're going to need that. Animation, Constraints, Orientation Constrain to that. And Keep Initial Offset. So at this point now, I should have most of my armature now working. And there you can see that's exactly what I've got. So now if I want the head to work, well, I could link the head to my IK chain, but that's not really realistic in the way I'd animate with it. I'd probably going to animate by pulling the head around. So what I could do is link the IK chain to the head. Now this works in one way, in that now when I move the head, the whole lamp reacts the way I expect it to, but it all falls apart if I go in and try and rotate it. You can see, well, that doesn't work right. That's because it's rotating around its parent, or its child, I should say, which basically you're dragging the IK chain around this pivot point because it's inheriting the rotations as well. So what I'm going to do is simply undo the link there, and instead of linking it, I'm going to use another constraint, and I'm just going to use a position constraint, and we'll position constrain it to the lamp. And you're going to see things are going to go crazy the instant I do this. Just like so. And that's because the pivots aren't oriented, and it's now pulling my IK chain handle all the way up to the same pivot point. But if I turn on that handy Keep Initial Offset, all is good. And now what that means is if I grab onto this lamp head, I can move it around, and it works fine. And if I go and rotate the lamp head, that also works fine and controls it. Now, ultimately, what happens when I grab my base, which really is the parent to everything here? Well, then things get a little weird. So you'll see, first off, I have one more object that I have to link. So let's go and link that to that object. So now when I move, my base will move everything. But probably I want the head to go with it. And this can be debatable depending on the type of control you're doing. So I'm going to link the head right back to the base. So at this point now, I have a fully rigged lamp that I can do this with, that I can do this with, and if I need to, I can also do this, or move it, or do whatever I want. So that's your basic setup for a lamp. There it is there. And if we just go in, I'll just throw it into a kind of a nicer hardware shaded mode. There you are, your finished lamp with lights everything else ready to go. So I hope that answered some of the questions that are out there about how you rig stuff like this up. Really becomes a lot of use of IK chains, not as much as you'd expect necessarily. And then everything else is constraints. The other thing that I use a lot when doing mechanical armatures is actually look at constraints to make sure they have pistons line up and things like that. So that's another one to look into, and maybe I'll do a video covering those types of things at a later date. So that's everything. Thank you very much.